Sure. Thank you, Lucy, very much for this welcoming part. And now I would like to officially welcome all of you to today's Learning Clinic. I'm very excited to be here today and to have this Learning Clinic organized. And before we say officially start with the topic, I would really like to recognize the space that we are in and like the whole movement that is continuously working on making it safer and more inclusive and making us all feel more comfortable to be part of this space. And in today's world where everything is a little bit, let's say, dynamic in the world, it's amazing to be part of this community. My name is Gorana, and I am a license for the CE region at Let's Connect working group. And today, with my colleagues from Let's Connect team, I will be facilitating this learning clinic. And today, we have a learning clinic that is called Safe Spaces, Strong Voices, Advancing Inclusion through the UCoC. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. I'm sure that some of us have heard about UCoC, some of us have not, and that is totally okay. But even if you have like a little bit less experience, you will hear a lot of amazing things about UCoC and how you can implement it from our speakers today. And today we have Bridgit Kurgat, gender lead from Wikimedia Foundation. We have Abigail Adu-Daako, senior specialist, trust and safety policy from Wikimedia Foundation. And we have Nasma Ahmed, senior manager, trust and safety, Wikimedia Foundation. We can go to the next slide. This is a little, let's say, reminder that all of our activities are organized by Trust and Safety Guide. Here, we at Let's Connect, we will have, by the end of this introduction, letters LC or two words Let's Connect by our names. And if you feel at any point a little bit uncomfortable, you have maybe some concerns, or you would like to ask us anything, or to tell us that maybe you're not feeling maybe safe enough or not feeling free enough to speak, or raise your opinion, please just DM us privately here on Zoom and we will do our best to solve that. We can go to next slide. And now let's talk a little bit about Let's Connect culture. Let's Connect exists now for like more than 2 years, which I'm very happy to say. And this is a peer learning program that is operated as a joint community foundation initiative. What does that mean? That means that this program has a support from Wikimedia Foundation, but it is led by communities. As I said earlier, I'm a license for CE region, and all of us Let's Connect working group members are licensed for some different regions, and we are trying to listen to the needs of community, and we are trying to engage as much as we can. We are also here to have a good time. We are here to learn. We are here to talk, to connect, to talk about our mistakes. I love talking about our mistakes because I think we're all making them, and it is so important to have a space where you feel safe and comfortable to share, because we can learn a lot from that. We are trying, and I think we are doing good, but you can tell us that by the end of this learning clinic. We are really trying to make people feel comfortable and confident and safe into speaking up and talking and interacting and connecting within each other. And the latest, we have something to learn from anyone, no matter the experience. We can go, yeah. And this is our agenda for today. After this check-in and introduction, we will have overview of UCoC and gender sensitivity for 15 minutes. After that, we'll have a short Q&A. After that, UCoC in the movement, 20 minutes, then breakout room discussions, group discussions, and Q&A, and we will have a closure. As you can see, we will have a lot of discussions today, so prepare to talk. And why are we here today? What is the goal and aim of this session? We're here to improve awareness and understanding of UCoC in gender sensitivity context, but also UCoC in general. We're here to encourage a collaborative and action-oriented approach to gender equity in the movement. And I think that we're all facing that every day. And of course, we are here to foster connections between Wikimedians and the UCoC team. UCoC is a term that is being mentioned in our movement for some time. It is being brought a lot, but today you will learn a little bit more practical things about that and how you can actually implement that in your community. And now I will give the mic to Nasma and for her to tell us a little bit more about UCoC. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much for having us. Apologies, both Abigail and I are a little bit sick, so you're going to hear it in our voices. We were just sharing space together last week in person, so just a deep apology for that. My name is Nasma Ahmed. I'm the Senior Manager of Trust and Safety. Oh, let's go to, yeah, there, session goals. I'm a Manager of Trust and Safety. I'm based in Canada. I've been at the organization now for 4 years, but I've been part of the broader movement in digital rights space for the last 10 years. So today the goal is for us to talk about the Universal Code of Conduct, how it engages with the community and the platform. And then on top of that, we are also going to be thinking about the processes of how to think about violations of the UCoC and how to report them, understanding the Universal Code of Conduct Coordinating Committee and how they provide that additional support. And also just really engaging on how the Universal Code of Conduct, the enforcement guidelines can create safer environments online and offline. So we will be doing what we call a deep dive on all things Universal Code of Conduct. At any point, if you have questions, please do not hesitate to add them into the chat or ping us. We will be following up with questions after I talk, and then we're going to have another Q&A later. So please don't hesitate to ask questions. Next slide. So you might be curious, who is the Trust and Safety team and what do they do? So the Trust and Safety team builds on community processes so that we can actually build safer environments. So we actually take on issues that the communities cannot handle. We have a very strict mandate around that. And so that means that we do investigative work, such as operations investigations on issues that violate the terms of use policy. And our goal is to provide support when there are no mechanisms available or it is currently overwhelming the community. Overwhelming the community could be that one, it is taking too many resources from the community to handle this issue. Two, it could be that it is actually difficult and puts them at risk, potentially human rights risk, to engage in the issue. So we are we have different methods that are available to provide that additional support. And then on top of that, we design and develop a strategy, right? So from anything like embedding the Digital Service Act and ensuring that we are remaining compliant to regulation, for example, we make sure we work on that. We evaluate risks. We do research, and that could be anything from the community making an ask of us, right, around doxing, for example, right? So the sharing of personal identifiable information and how to better support researchers, for example, and not doing that when they engage with the movement. So we have quite a vast kind of set of work that we do, and we include policy, disinformation, and the operation work. So just want to, I think the meta page, we'll share the meta page as well so that you can just engage with that. But we are really here to provide the kind of last recourse available alongside the Universal Code of Conduct Coordinating Committee. Next slide. So why does gender equity matter? So we have a clear content and knowledge gap, right? So less than 20% of the 1.9 million biographies hosted on Wikipedia are about women or non-binary people. For representation, only about 15% of Wikipedia contributors identify as women. They are underrepresented in our communities throughout. And then leadership, right? Fewer women, non-binary folks, and our administrators, or which once again reinforces the systemic inequalities that we do see across the board when you're using specifically the platform Wikipedia. Next slide. So then we have the Universal Code of Conduct, and this is a baseline behavior expectation, right, of building what we call safer communities for people. I say safer, and I use that language because safety and the concept of safety is really up to you, right, in regards to how you engage with the concept of safety. What we do hope the Universal Code of Conduct does is create safer environments by creating language and framing language that allows people to understand what is deemed acceptable and not acceptable. It is important that you also see the Universal Code of Conduct as an opportunity to build upon it, right? If there is something in your own local context that is important. So it can be used as a tool to address disparities by fostering an inclusive, respectful, and harassment-free environment for everyone, because we are all working towards the sum of all free knowledge. And so it can do this through, one, creating safer environments and spaces, prohibiting harassment, insults, doxing as in the sharing of personal identifiable information that one has not shared themselves, and also harmful behavior, which often impact women, marginalized genders in online spaces. So then we also have the encouraging of participation. By encouraging behaviors such as respect, civility, solidarity, we actually create a safer environment for people to discuss and engage and feel empowered to contribute. Then we have the aspect of enforcement and accountability. So we have the enforcement guidelines provide mechanisms, right, and processes for reporting and addressing violations. This allows us to see, okay, this is the baseline behavior. How do you ensure that there's a process, right, to deal with those behaviors? And so the enforcement guidelines plays a role in supporting that and ensuring that we have clear conflict resolution processes. Next slide. So what is the Universal Code of Conduct? As I said before, it's a baseline, right? A minimum set of guidelines expected and unacceptable, what is expected and unacceptable behavior across all Wikimedia platforms and spaces. You could actually see it at the bottom of every page. It's actually on the footer. So it shows that it is an integral part of how we're seeing the work moving forward. This was initially called on by the Movement Strategy 2030 goals and then ratified by the board in 2020, so the official text of the Universal Code of Conduct. And it was drafted by a diverse group of volunteers with staff support and applies equally to all Wikimedians without any exceptions. That includes staff members, for example. Next. So you might be curious, why do we need a UCoC? We are working with communities from all over the world, right? Just think about the people who are on this call, whether it be from, you're living in, the eastern sides of India, or you're in Oakland. And so we're coming from so many different backgrounds, and we are engaging with each other in the best way that we know, of course, but in making sure that we are acknowledging the challenges that can come up, right, when engaging with people from everywhere. And also, let's be honest, engaging even with people within your own language community or own ethnic community, it is important to have like a baseline understanding of what behaviors are acceptable and not acceptable, right? It allows for one, people to understand how they engage in the space and also how to deal with recourse, right? When issues do come up, because issues do come up. We're human at the end of the day. And so I do think that it is important for us to ensure that we have something like the Universal Code of Conduct to build upon. We want to build upon this, right? And that is why we actually say a minimum set guidelines. And the reasons also why we want to do this is over 50% of Wikipedias do not have code of conduct or local policies. So that means the baseline behavior was not actually clarified prior to the UCoC coming into play. Most small and medium-sized communities do not have what we call an arbitration committee or adjudication process. So that means their ability to handle an issue that comes up. And there's also fewer admins. There's also been a general increase in the number of users experiencing harassment in our online communities and offline spaces. This was from our community insight survey that helped kind of lead into what we call the UCoC. And then the movement strategy recommendation that clearly highlighted the need for safety and inclusion. And the movement strategy process included the community at large, right? Engaging in those recommendations. So the ask was quite clear, right? That it was needed to have a baseline behavior of how we all engage in our environments, offline and online. And that is why the UCoC came about. And, Abigail will be talking about it a little bit more about how we moved from the UCoC to the enforcement guidelines and what we call the U4C. We'll go to the next slide. And I will just say that what does the UCoC cover? I would definitely recommend reading through the Universal Code of Conduct. It is currently available in multiple languages, and this is just an example of what is provided. We have expected behavior. So, for example, have a mutual respect for others, practice empathy, assume good faith, and engage in constructive edits. Respect the way that contributors name and describe themselves. So this plays into, for example, if you use a different name, right? Try your best to respect that. Be civil and show mutual support and look out for other contributors. And then we have some unacceptable behaviors, harassment. So this includes insults, encouraging or threatening harm, doxing, hounding, or trolling. We have issues of abuse of power, so privilege or influence. This includes abuse of office, advance rights, and psychological manipulation. We have content vandalism and the abuse of the projects, so such as hate speech and manipulating content. This is a high level of just some of the aspects that you can find in the Universal Code of Conduct. I once again would suggest, Chinu, thank you for adding it into the chat. Please, review the Universal Code of Conduct. It is, once again, the minimum set guidelines that is expected of all folks engaging in the movement. And so I'm going to pass it over to Abigail, who's going to talk about how do we take the Universal Code of Conduct, which is a policy document, into action through enforcement guidelines and the Universal Code of Conduct Coordinating Committee. It's a really long word, which is why we call it the U4C, which I can say, funny enough, was actually initially a joke that someone came up with, which is the U4C, and it landed. So we've called it the U4C since. Abigail, passing it over to you.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting, Abigail. Thank you, Nasma, for your slides. I think it was very informative. Before we go to next part, I would like to ask participants if they have any question. I saw some questions in the Etherpad, so before we go to next part, maybe we can give them an answers, and then we can go to Abigail's.
Yeah, I was actually going to flag the questions on the Etherpad because I already saw them. I think that we can maybe address the first two questions. The third question is in the slides because we knew you all were gonna ask this question. We prepared for it. I'm joking, but I think it's gonna be addressed in the slides that we have. But I think we can maybe do the first two questions. I don't know, Gorana, would you want to read it out? And
Yeah, sure. So the first question was, in what ways can the UCoC be better communicated or introduced to newcomers in the movement?
Yes, I can answer that question. And apologies, y'all. This is why we have an agenda. So thank you. There are many ways that the UCoC can be introduced. I'm going to be honest, right? The Universal Code of Conduct has been in operation for the last 4 years. And I do think there are gaps, right, in how people have engaged with the document itself in practice. And so one of the ways that I have seen it shared with folks is that through like when new people are contributing for the first time, it is part of the kind of conversation of, hey, check out the Universal Code of Conduct. And when people are actually engaging with new contributors, it is part of the language that is shared. That is one of the ways. I do also suggest and have seen this before, which is when new admins are introduced, if there is an admin conf, so an admin conference in that language community, it is brought in as well, right, as an introduction of baseline behaviors, especially for new admins who may not know. I do think that there are more ways for us to actually ensure that the UCoC is shared. So I actually would love to also have suggestions from folks, right, of what would have been the most useful for you, right, when you were engaging initially with the movement. I'm really curious because we are trying to expand the ways that people have access to it or stumble on it, right? So we are trying to find new ways of doing so, whether it be through the administrative conferences that happen, through the new contributor pipeline, right? So how people engage with new contributors. But if there are other methods that we should be considering, I would love to know. So that is something I'm going to flip it back over because I think we are trying to find new ways to engage people on the Universal Code of Conduct.
Thank you, Nasma. Thank you very much. Okay, so the second question was, how can UCoC be accessible for all user group?
Yes. So this is an interesting question because it comes from the assumption that it is not available to all user groups. Everyone does have to follow the Universal Code of Conduct. It is an expectation and has been an expectation since 2020 that all user groups, affiliates, everyone, from the new editor to a new contributor has to follow the Universal Code of Conduct. I do think what this question is, asking is the implementation part, right, of holding, whether it be one holding accountable, right? So holding someone accountable if they're breaking the rules, and processes around that. And that is actually one of the more difficult questions and what we're actually working towards right now. We have a project called the Universal Code of Conduct Adherence Project. And why this came about was we were noticing that even though the Universal Code of Conduct is available for folks, we were noticing that communities did not have, they did not necessarily have local processes to deal with the Universal Code of Conduct. So that meant that the issues that were coming up in the community were, one, not being addressed, or it was difficult for them to address, or it would come to the foundation. And this is, by the way, very common across the movement, especially for smaller groups. And so the hope here is that we are going to be building better processes that people can actually use. So, for example, guiding questions to help you localize the document, or guiding questions to help you consider pathways for accountability, so that it can be actually taken on by more user groups and taken on by more language communities. So that's actually something that we are actively working on in regards to providing some additional resources towards that, because it is a baseline expectation. And I do think it's quite hard to take the time to build those local processes, but that is why we're building towards additional materials that can help people get there. Because the hope here is that everyone is following it, but you also need the resources and the capacity to be able to take this on and put it in your local communities. So that is something that we are working towards. We're also trying to find more avenues to engage with people in regional conferences and at Wikimania, to also expand on that capacity, right? And really ensure that people have the capacity to engage, and the resources to engage in different ways with the Universal Code of Conduct, because it is not meant to be a top-down approach, right? The hope is that someone could take it and figure out ways that you can navigate it in your own language community. And so I hope we're able to answer that. But I definitely think that there are more methods that we are considering on our end to make it a bit more clear to people as well.
Thank you very much, Nasma. And I really liked what you said, because we can connect that to our next question, which is, can the committee of UCoC help small communities develop localized policies?
Yes, so that we have the Universal Code of Conduct Coordinating Committee, which is the U4C. They're an elected body enforcing the Universal Code of Conduct. One aspect of that work, actually, that they're finalizing is training documentation. So the training is going to provide additional mechanisms for people to take that work and localize it. We are also going to be expanding the UCoC Adherence Project, which is working closely with language communities. So we just select a couple of communities that we've already worked with and just extend that work. So that is also something that we're going to continue to do on our end. So it is a collaboration with the U4C and also the Trust and Safety team to build those capacities. So yes, the U4C should be coming out with their trainings, I believe, by the summertime. And then for the UCoC Adherence Project, which both of them are connected, we are hoping to also expand our program there, and that is working more closely with the language community or user group. And when we say closely, we mean setting up meetings, setting up training opportunities, assessing the policies, and just helping kind of guide that work and facilitate that work, not necessarily us writing it. It's just facilitating the process. So we should also have some more clarity on that in the summertime as well. And I say summertime, which I mean June. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Nasma. And we still have time for questions, so I will read them. I will read the next one. Are there any reprimanding measures for people who float these rules and norms? If yes, what are some of them?
Yes, there are measures. Abigail will be talking about that a little bit more, and that is actually described very clearly in the enforcement guidelines and is currently being actioned by the Universal Code of Conduct Coordinating Committee. So I'll do a pause on that because we'll actually get a bit deeper into that topic area soon.
Thank you, Nasma. And the last one in the Etherpad. Are there any plans to make the UCoC shorter and more reader-friendly? Would mean a lot to accessibility.
Yes. So actually, part of the enforcement guidelines requires an annual review if there are changes to the Universal Code of Conduct, the Universal Code of Conduct Coordinating Committee Charter, and the enforcement guidelines. So actually, there is an opportunity to suggest that at this moment. So right now, they are currently assessing the enforcement guidelines and the charter, but they will be working towards the Universal Code of Conduct. I will add the meta actually, or if Abigail can find the meta link, definitely I would say providing that feedback to the U4C would be useful. They're the ones who are holding the UCoC in regards to what the review will be in the future. And so I definitely would recommend sharing that with them because yes, whether it changes completely or shifts in some way, I definitely understand the need for one, whether it be a shorter language or, for example, using more plain English, right, as a way of describing this as well, which is something that we have also been discussing. Abigail has added the meta link, so please add your input to the annual review for the UCoC. That will definitely be a place for the U4C to take in that input.
Thank you very much, Nasma. I would like also to thank all of you for questions. I'm sure that Abigail's part and Abigail's slides will bring a lot more questions, and we will have discussions and Q&A and breakout rooms later. So you will have also the opportunity to talk and discuss a little bit more with our amazing speakers today. I will give my mic to Abigail, and yeah, I'm looking forward to listening to you. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. Hi everyone. My name is Abigail. I don't think I introduced myself. I also work on the trust and safety team. I primarily focus on policy, hence the UCoC, everything UCoC related. I think as I was going through the questions on the Etherpad, especially I think like the last question 3, 4, 5 mostly enforcement related questions, and I'm hoping that we can address it or you get more clarity as I go through my slides. But if for any reason you don't get answers, feel free to flag that. I just want to add to the questions around accessibility and how to make the UCoC friendly. Like Nasma said, the review is happening right now. If it hasn't ended already, I think the U4C might still be receiving comments, so that's a good opportunity to provide feedback there. One thing that we've been doing on our side, I think Nasma already mentioned that yes, I'm gonna remember to speak a little slower, apologies. Also, if for any reason you can't hear me or I sound very nasal, I also do have a bit of a cold, please let me know, and then we can I will remember to slow down or talk more clearly. We are also working on a UCoC adherence project where we are trying to increase awareness of the UCoC just more broadly through just sharing very short snippets of some sections of the UCoC to make it easy for people to digest, because we do understand that the UCoC is very long, and I think sometimes maybe in these bite-sized formats it makes it also easier to digest. So yeah, that's the only piece that I wanted to add here. So I think we can move to the next slide, please. Yes, so Shifting gears here to talk about the enforcement guidelines. When we developed the UCoC, we realized that there was a need to have enforcement guidelines to ensure that we are enforcing the UCoC in a more equitable and consistent way across all wikis, across all of our platforms and our spaces, because it is important that, you know, how maybe the UCoC is interpreted and enforced on, you know, one wiki is very similar and consistent to how it is being applied in other wikis. So that was primarily the reason why why there was a need to create enforcement guidelines to ensure that the principles and the processes for UCoC enforcement were provided, so that the different enforcement structures and adjudication processes across different wikis will use that as guidance while they enforce the UCoC. Hence the creation of the enforcement guidelines. So similar to the UCoC, the enforcement guidelines were also drafted by a drafting committee of a diverse group of volunteers with staff participants as well. I don't know if many of you remember or even participated in this process, but the enforcement guidelines was presented for community approval, where for the first time it gained 57% support, and we had, you know, about almost like 2,500 voters, but there was also still a lot of feedback and areas for improvement that community members flagged that they wanted to see in the enforcement guidelines, that even though we did get majority approval, the drafting committee just had to go back with all the feedback that they received to go edit and make amendments and revisions to the enforcement guidelines, and then presented it again for a second phase of community approval, where it did get, I think there was an increase in voter turnout and also a major jump in like the approval rate. Which kind of finalized the approval of the enforcement guidelines. So yeah, I'm not sure this is probably if this is the first in wiki history, but yeah, we did vote on the enforcement guidelines twice. But this also goes to show how much the committee really wanted to make sure that they were listening to people's input and feedback and ensuring that this is the enforcement guidelines was aligned with, you know, the movement's mission and values, and that the community could feel had ownership and feel that this is something that is easy to implement and aligns with the different wikis community processes. Next slide, please. So the enforcement guidelines also cover two main sections. It's kind of been grouped into like preventive work and responsive work. On the preventive work is mostly how do we even prevent harm on the platform in the first place? How are we proactively ensuring that people one, aware of like the policies that exist and proactively embodying the values in the UCoC, and also especially when it comes to expected behavior and avoiding the unacceptable behavior, and not so that we don't even become reactive or responsive in the first place. So that's what the preventive work entails, which mostly involves like making increasing UCoC awareness, making the text accessible, you know, like we've already discussed, and also a UCoC focus training, which the U4C is working on and should be releasing that very soon. But all of those are ways that to ensure, I think primarily the goals are to increase awareness of the policy and also to increase the understanding of the policies to ensure that people are proactively taking steps to embody like the expected behaviors on the platform, that we don't even have a need for enforcement, which is, you know, in an ideal world scenario. And then the responsive work part of it is mostly how do we respond when there actually is a policy violation. So the principles and the processes for how to like report and process reports, providing resources for processing cases with specific approaches. For example, I think there was a question, because different communities will be, the UCoC primarily would be enforced by the local community processes and structures. So how do we ensure that we are doing that in a very consistent way? So making sure there are resources for that. The U4C, and we'll be talking about the U4C's role in this in a short while, but providing all the relevant resources, interpretation, and interpretation of the UCoC, even in some cases, what needed to ensure to provide support with the enforcement of the policy, and also principles and recommendations for enforcement structures as well, or even recommendations on for communities that do not have enforcement structures, like how do they build or develop their own enforcement structures and processes to enforce the UCoC. So those are examples of what the responsive work entail in the enforcement guidelines. Next slide, please. Okay. So these are some of the, firstly, we can talk about the enforcement approaches and the enforcement guidelines. And this is by no means, an exhaustive list, but these are some of the ways, just based on common practices across our movement and across different wikis. These are some of the ways that the local policies or the UCoC, or even other broader policies, like even the terms of use, have been enforced on the wikis, in several wikis. And I think that's why these are some of the approaches that are recommended in the UCoC. Arbitration committees, I'm sure many of you here will be familiar with that. I know it's only very few wikis that do have arbitration committees, but this is like one of the recommended approaches to enforcing the UCoC. Also advanced rights holders, admins, stewards, global stewards. They are also really able to enforce the UCoC on both local wikis or across different wikis. Panels of local administrators. I know normally this is done on some wikis already through maybe like RFCs, or even some admins will have like a mailing list, for example, where you can maybe report or escalate like an incident to them. And also just local contributors, which involves everybody here individually, through specifically through community discussion and agreement, which is something we already do through like RFC or village pump discussions to come to an agreement on specific actions to take. So this is by no means an exhaustive list, but this is like I said earlier, based on just common practices, and so those are some of the currently recommended approaches on how to enforce the UCoC across wikis. Some of the principles and recommendations also that are provided in the enforcement guidelines. Sorry, I'm reading the comment we have in the chat here. As a non-native speaker, I'm really struggling to keep up with speech in an amount of, okay. I will try to slow down. And also I think we have provided the link to the slide decks, which you can also have later to reference and maybe go through slowly or like follow along. But yeah, I'll also try to like speak very slowly. So yeah, some of the principles that are provided in the enforcement guidelines for the different enforcement structures for enforcing the UCoC is also one, fairness in process, making sure that there are no conflicts of interest, and there are also even clear conflicts of interest policies where individuals, maybe on an APCOM or even admins, know when to abstain from a case, so that there are no issues with conflicts of interest, and that there's due process followed and that is fair. that the process is transparency. I think on our wikis, we do that a lot already, where almost every discussion is public, and it's more like a very community discussion where we come to an agreement. But the transparency of the process is also a key principle, and it's very important to ensure that the processes that are, or the just like the thought processes or the arguments that are used to enforce the policies or even take action on a specific policy violation is very clear and aligns with the UCoC policy text as well. And also having the option to providing avenues for appeal is also very, very important to ensure that people, individuals who, if their actions taken, will have that option to be able to appeal to either the local enforcement structure or the U4C, especially if no local enforcement structure exists, they can always also appeal to the U4C. So these are some of the recommendations in terms of the principles that local enforcement structures are advised to follow when enforcing the UCoC on their local wikis. We can move to the next slide, please. So we also wanted to talk about some of the specific ways that we can ensure that we're enforcing the UCoC in a very inclusive way. And I think some of that have been already even been mentioned in terms of making the text accessible and ensuring that, especially with newcomers, we are making it accessible to them, and people are also increasing awareness of the policy generally. Some of the I recommended ideas, also based on the different discussions or even different conversations that have come up, especially at local convenience, I think is increasing the gender diversity in our policy enforcement structures, especially maybe when you look at the number of women on arbitration committees or admins, or women identifying on non-binary individuals. I think that we can all agree that those are very, very low numbers, and I think diversity is important to ensure even the diversity of thought, the diversity of perspectives, especially when it comes to case adjudication, especially on very unique cases that sometimes it requires some subject matter expertise or some perspective from people, a breadth of expertise across different experiences and different backgrounds. So I think that is like one of the areas, especially in the community enforcement structures, such as, admins, arbitration committees, even the U4C, the UCoC coordinating committee, which we call a U4C for short. And increased gender diversity in the representation in these groups, I think is very important to ensure a very inclusive enforcement process. Having confidential reporting channels for policy violations, I think are also very, very necessary to ensure that individuals feel very safe when reporting very sensitive cases. I know that very true to the wiki style, most of our discussions are very open. It's a very open community discussion, and you come to an agreement. But as much as we should have space for that, I think it's important to also ensure that we're having private reporting channels. I know that for some admins, like there would be an option maybe for a private email, email address where you can also like report certain incidents. And I think especially for people who identify as women or non-binary folks, this is very, very, very important and necessary for providing those kind of channels. also ensuring that there is strict adherence and enforcement of existing policies. In addition to the Universal Code of Conduct, we also have the event safety guidance, the friendly space policies that are more catered to the in-person and even virtual events and spaces, in addition to the Universal Code of Conduct, to ensure that there's safety both online and offline, in-person, virtually, in all our both in-person and virtual spaces. And I think finally, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, and actually I'm very curious to hear the thoughts and other options that people have on this as well. But I think another way that we can ensure very inclusive enforcement process is also starts with awareness. People have to be aware of the policies. The policies have to be accessible in the first place. And that is why trainings like this are very important, providing the relevant tools. I think, we already talked about the UCoC, working on the training that should be coming out soon, and just general resources. I know somebody already even asked a question about like localizing policies. These are some of the very practical resources that we can also provide for communities to ensure that there's awareness, because I strongly believe in awareness as a very powerful tool, because a policy can exist, but if people are not even aware of the policies or the content of the policy, how do they feel empowered by the policy even to use it to protect themselves? It just feels like, it's just a very decorative, shiny object that exists. Can you hear me? I think I froze for a minute. That exists, but in reality it's not very useful. So I think awareness and trainings and resources can be very useful. Can we go to the next slide, please? So yes, Cassie, please go on.
Hi, I'm just checking in if you can speak just a little bit slower for our interpreters so they can keep up with you. Thank you so much, Abigail.
Thanks for the reminder. I'm sorry. I'm just I'm really trying, and I appreciate you for the constant reminders. Okay. So now I am going to talk about the Universal Code of Conduct Coordinating Committee and their role in UCoC enforcement. The U4C, as Nasma explained, is just a beautiful made up short name that we came up with for the UCoC coordinating committee, because it just makes it easier to pronounce it and remember it that way. The U4C, as defined in the enforcement guidelines, is supposed to be a co-equal body with other high-level decision-making bodies such as the arbitration committee, for example, and its main goal and primary responsibility is to serve as a final recourse in especially in cases where there's systemic failure by local groups to enforce the UCoC. And I know that this is something that has come up in terms of what counts as systemic failure, or how do we even define that? And that is something the U4C is actually, trying to clarify in this recent phase of the annual review. So I'll encourage all of you here, if this is something that, you're interested in, to follow the process and provide feedback as well. But primarily, the enforcement of the Universal Code of Conduct is for the local, our local enforcement structures and processes. There are some communities that do not have these processes and structures in place. So in those cases, they can report cases directly to the U4C, for example. But I think the good first step is always to report or escalate any kind of incidents or policy violation to your local enforcement process or structure, however it is however it exists on your local wiki. That should always be your first points of contact. But in the situation where you do not have that, or there is systemic failure, you can escalate these kind of cases to the U4C. The U4C is fully set up and operational now, and accepting cases. So you can visit their Meta Wiki page if you want to report a case, and I'm going to put it here in the chat for people. Yeah, you can review, and they have their process there in terms of how to escalate the process. But I really want to reiterate that your first point of call should be your local wiki process or structure. Can we move to the next slide, please? So this is kind of a short summary of the U4C's work and their role in just UCoC enforcement broadly. Firstly, they do handle complaints and appeals. But like I mentioned, like in the previous slide, excuse me, it is in cases where you do not have a local, process or structure, or especially in the case of appeals, when your local maybe enforcement structure takes a decision, and you can also decide if it relates to the UCoC to appeal to the U4C on such cases. So on the cases that the U4C would handle, they would, perform any all the investigations that are necessary to resolve those kind of complaints and appeals. They are also responsible for providing resources for communities on UCoC best practices, such as, the training material that we've been talking about that hopefully should be coming out soon, and any other resources. They are also supposed to provide a final interpretation of the UCoC and the enforcement guidelines if the need arises. For whatever reason, if a local enforcement structure is struggling maybe with and interpreting or understanding some sections of the UCoC or the enforcement guidelines, they can reach out to the U4C for that kind of, final interpretation. And finally, they also monitor and assess the effectiveness of UCoC enforcement and provide recommendations for improvement, normally by doing that through the annual review, which again is ongoing right now. So if you have any feedback, thoughts, opinions, feel free to go to check out the U4C page and share that with them. Next slide, please. Okay, so I know that we've had actually a lot of questions on this. So I wanted to provide an example of specific practical ways that you can report a UCoC violation. I will say that this is just an example. Ultimately, you should always follow, and this is not even an example, maybe this is more like guidance. Ultimately, you should follow the processes that exist on your local wiki, or what your local enforcement structure or adjudication processes recommend. But this is just a guidance in terms of a process that individually, because I think this is a question that we get a lot, and I think it's useful to have that guidance on how to even approach how to report these kind of violations. I think a good first step is always to assess the behavioral conduct. I think depending on whether it's happening on wiki or during an event in person, for example, or even like a virtual space, it's useful to observe and analyze the behavior to determine whether it explicitly violates the UCoC, because that is very important. And bear in mind that we're specifically talking about UCoC violations here. So it's important to know to to do that assessment first to determine whether it explicitly violates the policy. And then I think a good next step is identifying the category of violation. Thankfully, I think the UCoC is structured in a way where, you know, we have expected behavior, we have under expected behavior, mutual respect, practice empathy, you know, we have all these subsections. Under unacceptable behaviors, there's harassment, there is doxing, there, you know, so it's important to identify the bucket of violation that it falls within, or the category, because I think that is important to make a very clear to make your report have a lot of clarity and make it very clear and direct, and make it easier for the enforcement structures in place to really understand and be able to take action. That being said, I do know that there are some cases where you know, we are humans, there would always be nuance, but I think as much as possible, you should try to make it very clear and direct and, you know, succinct as possible. And then after that, I think a good next step is to identify your local enforcement process, reporting process, whether it is going to an arbitration committee, if they have, you know, a page where they receive reports, or a private email address, or an RFC or village pump, or if it is, you know, depending on your situation, this is something that has to go to the U4C. Identifying and knowing the process, even if it's a case that has to come to TNS, you know, knowing trust and safety is what I mean by TNS, the trust and safety team. It's important to know what the recommended reporting processes are so that you can follow them accordingly, because I think that makes it easier to get your answers or actions taken swiftly and quickly for you. And then if in situations where, one, you do not have a local process, or two, you've already been through your local process, but maybe you're not satisfied with the action that was taken and you want to appeal to the U4C, or if local processes, I already said, do not exist or fail to enforce the UCoC. Those are the only scenarios where you report to the U4C. So like I said earlier, and I also want to make it very clear, your first line of reporting should always be your local community processes, or whatever, you know, your local wiki enforcement structure is. So I hope this is useful, but this is a good, maybe, I think you should, like I said, use it as guidance, but in terms of like a thought process to go through when you think there's, you know, you observe a policy violation and want to report it. Next slide, please. So these are also some of the very practical ways, and I think, you know, even throughout my presentations, this talk have made reference to it, but these are some of the very practical ways that are recommended in the enforcement guidelines that on how you can enforce the UCoC within your local communities, especially with communities that currently do not have any kind of enforcement structure or processes. These are some of the ways that I think you can start thinking about maybe building those kind of structures or processes for, you know, for your wiki. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. I will encourage everybody to read the UCoC, to read the enforcement guidelines as they are more detailed, and is a more useful resource that way. Threats of physical violence or harm, those, as always, would always, you know, come to the trust and safety team or your local, also police, or especially if it's life-threatening. On wiki evaluations, I think generally, the on wiki structures and processes, like the SysOps, and your local arbitration committees or any kind of local enforcement structure, or the U4C within all the caveats that we've already talked about. Of wiki evaluations to, I think, similar things apply, U4C, even though enforcement structure exists. And then violations of in-person events or even virtual spaces, I should have added that here, like this one. I think almost always there would be like a event safety team or some form of team or individual providing that kind of event safety support. But if that doesn't exist, I think that especially for events that trust and safety teams are normally there physically to provide support, which is some community events like Wikimania, for example, you can also report to trust and safety. And the U4C, again, is also as listed in the enforcement guidelines as well. So these are just, I think, for my goal with this is just to provide examples, because I think that, sometimes people get very overwhelmed and are not really sure where to start from, or like what the process is, or like where to go. And I hope this kind of breaks it down a little bit and makes it easier for you. Next slide, please. Oh, okay. So we are at the time for a breakout room exercise, but I guess we can do questions. Now I see that there may be some questions before we do breakout, or whatever Veronica see, and whatever you recommend. Yeah.
We will have Q&A part after the breakout rooms. So I would like to ask all of the participants again, please feel free to ask your questions in the Etherpad or in the chat. We will take a good look at them and we will make sure to answer them after breakout room exercise. So now we will be divided into two breakout rooms. The main one, or this room, will continue having translators, but in the room number 2, we won't have translators. So now let's give Cassie a minute or two to make sure that we are all divided. So if you need translators, make sure to stay in this room.
Also, I've put the instructions and the scenarios in the chat. We also had it in the slide, but I figured it'll be easier in the chat. But let me know. I don't know if people, when they go into the breakout rooms, if they can still access the chat, or maybe you'll probably have to just copy and paste before you go into your breakout room. But yeah,
all this explanation instruction is also in the Etherpad, in the slides, but we will also copy that in the chat. But maybe you can take this time until Cassie is dividing us to start with the instruction. Deal with that kind of situations that are maybe not that comfortable or making them feel safe, because the Wikimedia as a moment, as a place to be, has a very good intention and very good aim. So, but yeah, I think it's very good to have this policy and to know now after this learning clinic what to do and who to reach out. Now I would give a place for our participants. If you would like to raise your hand, maybe if you have any questions for our speakers, or if you would like to share something, maybe your experience, or what is the thing that you learned today, or what is maybe the thing that you would like to discuss further. If not, we will switch to Etherpad and to those questions. Okay, if you would like to speak up, you can raise your mic. If not, let's go to Etherpad. So we had some questions that were arising when Abigail and Nasma were having their slides. and we had no time to answer them. So maybe now most of those questions were answered in the slides or in the breakout rooms, but maybe we can go through some of the things one more time just to summarize everything and to make like conclusion of this learning clinic. So one of the questions was, what are some barriers that prevent contributors from reporting violations to the UCoC?
Here's a, this is, yeah, I'm trying to get the context behind this question, because I think that's actually a question that I would ask you all. It's like, what are some of the barriers? Some that I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is I think the big gap I see is awareness, is that people are not aware of and that's even some of the conversations we had in the breakout room, which is why we wanted to also have that discussion, is that sometimes it is not clear to people how to report certain cases, or to whom, where to report it to. So for example, the first scenario that talked about physical harm, like that immediately should go to like the trust and safety team, because that's the team that handles any form of physical threat of harm or violence. So I think that it's just, yeah, there's just like an awareness gap. And I think also some of the points that were raised in the previous questions that Nasma answered, for example, around like accessibility to even like if policies are not translated in certain local languages, it makes it difficult for those communities to access the policy and understand and read them. So those are some of the ways that I think it's just like awareness about how to the contents of the policy, how to report, where to report, and the reporting about processes, and yeah, all of that.
Thank you very much, Abigail. We have a very interesting comment in the chat from René. He said, beyond everything else, this session can bring back to the table discussion about the governance of Wikimedia user groups. UCoC sessions could be very interesting for the new communities we help create each year. A small recommendation, encourage AFCOM to invite leaders of new communities to include rules derived from Universal Code of Conduct in their internal regulations. Thank you. Thank you, René, for this comment. Now we can go to next question. If anyone wants to speak up, please just raise your hand and we are here. What if there is no good response from UCoC team for harassment?
And yeah, this is also another question where I'm trying to understand the context. It depends on what you mean by good response. But when I also, I think when I was even going through the presentation, that is why I think appeals exist for a reason. Appeals and transparency of process are one of the recommended principles, right? Because I think it could be useful to provide some more context on what a good response is, because I also, as individuals, we all have our biases on what sometimes we think is like a good response. But I think that that's why, the U4C exists, one, and that's why you can also appeal cases to the U4C if maybe in some cases you're in situations where maybe your local enforcement process does not fail to maybe take action or do not provide a good response, which I'll put quotes around. Yeah, that's not.
Yes, I would say that one thing for the U4C in particular is that you will get a response from the U4C. So, for example, they will make it very clear if they're taking on a case. They will make it clear if they're not taking a case and why. So you will always have some sort of additional information provided to you when you are reaching out to the U4C. In regards to the type of response you receive. So for example, if they review the case and you don't like the outcome, there is one appeal processes that they work on, but also at the same time, they have a range of action items, right? So they also provide recommendations of how to do the work moving forward. So there is a lot of opportunity when it comes to the U4C. And so I would say reach out and give them a chance and see where it goes from there.
Thank you very much, both of you, for the answer. As I said, if anyone wants to speak up or open their mic, just raise your hand. Now we can go to next one. The question number 10. How do we know what to report and what not to report under the UCoC in short, given that the policy is too long, and how do we differentiate the roles and responsibilities of each of the sub-enforcement structures?
I can answer that question. So in regards to what to report or what not to report, it matters on how your community is engaging with the UCoC or if they have any forms of arbitration committee, or some people use notice boards to deal with conflicts that come up. So first you have to map what your language community, so we're talking about on Wiki, right? If, of course, you're a part of, let's say, a user group, there should be some sort of policy around how you implement the Universal Code of Conduct. How we differentiate roles and responsibilities for each enforcement structure is based on one, if there are physical threats of harm, you always can reach out to the trust and safety team to look into it. If it's UCoC violations, you first view it as like, go to your community first. If there are no mechanisms, you can go to the U4C. And so those are the ways to kind of think about it right now, because the idea is that the language community can take on all of the UCoC, not just the subsections of it. And if they cannot, it can go to the U4C. So the U4C also views their role and responsibility as the entirety of the UCoC as well. Hopefully that clears things up. Also, something I should important note, you can report to the U4C publicly, or you can report to them privately. So there are two options available to you. For the trust and safety team, the only option available to us is private in regards to reporting.
Thank you very much, Abigail and Nasma. We are unfortunately running out of the time. So before we close this session, I would like to ask you, Abigail and Nasma, to give us your final thoughts after this session, to give us your maybe conclusions and maybe one thing that we should remember.
If you can go to the next slide quickly. Sorry. Yeah, because I was just hoping to like end with this slide. Well, connecting it to the other slide where we literally all have a role to play in this, because to create a safer community space, we are all we all have to be in it together. And one, by embodying all the expected behaviors that the UCoC recommends, and also making sure that unacceptable behaviors are reported through like the right processes. But I think that individually, with some of the things that we've talked about here today in terms of awareness, accessibility, a lot of the things, I think we also have a role to play in this, in how we actively participate in some of the discussions, and also share those knowledges and spread the word. And that those are ways that I think we can also help create awareness and build a system and just a community of people all embodying like those kind of values. So that's what I wanted to flag, that I think we also, as much as we are talking about all the different ways to increase awareness and make them accessible, we can also contribute and have a role to play in that. Yeah. And yeah, I think that's it for me.
Yeah, and what I would, so what I would say is that I know that this work is not easy. So, at the end of the day, the most important thing is that we're all trying our best to work towards a more safer environment for all. And so I just wanted to note that there's going to be more opportunity for training and capacity building as we go through this year. So we will definitely make sure to share that out. And, if at any point you just need additional guidance, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're really trying to be in more community spaces and really kind of up level and provide more information around the Universal Code of Conduct. So any other piece that we can provide, please, or any other additional resources, please don't hesitate to reach out.